Welcome to Paint Ed. PCA provides painting contractors with connections they need to grow their business. To find out more and to become a member, visit pcapainted.org. Find more great content just like this on PCA Overdrive. A subscription to the platform is included with membership. For all you non-members out there, sign up for a free trial. PCA Overdrive is available on the App Store and Google Play. This episode is brought to you by Benjamin Moore and Sherwin-Williams.
Hey everyone, welcome back to Contractor Revolution, the podcast by Breakthrough Academy. Men's mental health is in crisis. We are 3 times more likely to turn to addiction and 4 times more likely to turn to suicide. And yet 40% of men will never seek help. In this episode, I'm sitting down with Connor Beaton, the founder of ManTalks and the author of Men's Work. Today, we're going to be diving into the importance of men's inner work. After overcoming his own struggles with infidelity, drugs, and alcohol, Connor's mission is to help men become better leaders, spouses, dads, and just overall people. In our conversation, we cover why men's health is in crisis today more than it ever has been, and why it's so hard for us to just get in touch with our inner selves, and how to identify and confront the hidden parts of ourselves through what Connor calls shadow work. And how doing your own inner work not only just pays off for yourself, but for your team and for your family, and how to foster healthy masculinity and self-leadership for you and your teams. Now, look, I get it. We love to often just unpack business systems here on this channel. But if you find this type of episode useful, make sure you let us know in the comments. Now, let's dive into it with Connor Beaton. You're watching Contractor Revolution, the podcast by Breakthrough Academy, where we systemize contracting businesses for growth. Keep watching to learn how the world's top contractors scale their companies, build killer teams, and make more while working less. Mr. Connor Beaton, thanks for coming on the show. Stoked to have you, man.
Thanks. Yeah, man. Thanks for having me.
It's been 10 years since I've spoken with you, and I believe we were just starting Breakthrough Academy when you were just starting ManTalks. Is that right?
That's true. Yeah. I remember you guys kicking it off like right around the same time.
We are both now busy doing this for the last 10 years. I am so curious to catch up on what's been going on. And for those listening, I want to walk through the work you do essentially, because I think you help men in such a unique way and you focus in on the inner problems that a lot of us have that no one want to talk about. So I want to get into that today. And you have your own journey in this. So let's start there. I would just love to know like how your early life has shaped the work that you actually do today, where you're working with men specifically to work through, is this fair to say work through our like,
yeah. That's basically it. Yeah, it's basically it. It's like, I mean, the slogan for ManTalks is it's not therapy, it's training. And so we take therapeutic modalities, psychological modalities and skills, and then teach men how to deploy them in a way that's effective. And, you don't have to go through the whole rigmarole of therapy. But I mean, my early life, there's sort of 2 pieces that I would say. I grew up, my family, my parents divorced when I was 3, and then they both married other people, and then they both had a daughter and then a son that were relatively the same age. And so I grew up between 2 family systems that looked identical on the outside, but then the characters of the players in those systems were polar opposites. So my mom and my stepmom were so opposite. My dad and my stepdad were polar opposite, et cetera. And I think very early on in life, there was just this curiosity of why people were the way they were that got activated inside of me. Like, why does he do that, but he does that? And that just stuck with me. I was just very, very curious about human nature and human beings and why we function the way that we function. And then fast forward later on in life, in my sort of like late 20s, I had built up an interesting career. I was traveling the world. I had a wonderful relationship, and I really imploded the whole thing. I was out of integrity. I was lying. I was cheating. I was struggling with substance abuse. And it was after that when I started to find my way onto a path of understanding the therapeutic concepts and psychological concepts. And I had a mentor that was in my life that really kind of took me under his wing. And it was it was an old school type apprenticeship. I was in my late 20s. He was in his like mid 70s. And I basically, helped him farm asparagus and chop wood and raise Rottweilers, which sounds like a wild thing, and it was. And he taught me psychological principles. He introduced me to Jung, and he taught me how to work with psychoanalysis and work with dreams and the shadow and all these types of things that would become a sort of like staple in how I would go on to work with people. So I would say that those are really the two things that paved the way for what I do today.
He kind of helped raise that piece of you that never got fully raised. There was a piece between the two families that was missing, and you were treading water, and this guy helped you through it.
Yeah, basically. It was the sort of classic raised by my stepfather, wanted to be raised by my father. That didn't happen. And I think that's the challenge that a lot of young men are facing, right? 1 in 4 kids in North America are going to grow up without their father in the house. And for a lot of, when you look at the data and the research and the stats around this, it disproportionately affects young boys. It doesn't as much affect young girls. It can have some side effects, but when you look at the data and the research, young boys that grow up in a household without a father figure around disproportionately have a lot of different side effects. They are, 90% more likely to get kicked out of school than, children that have a father in the household. They are 85% more likely to drop out of high school. I mean, substance abuse increases, physical abuse of themselves increases, mental health disorders increase. And so you can see this direct correlation that not having a dad in the home is very, very challenging for a lot of men, a lot of young boys.
So this is prevalent with people. What you're saying is it's prevalent with people without strong male figures in their life. And actually, when you say this, like even what you're talking about, so my dad also left when I was 3 years old. He actually died from a heroin overdose when I was 14 years old. And I still feel like I don't fully understand what it is to be a man. And there was little things early, like I'll tell you kind of a funny one, but like I remember not knowing how to shave. I remember like in my mid 20s having massive red like rash here because I didn't know how to shave. And I had to have the lady at the mall show me how to do it. And I was just like, man, I am missing some like key elements. Or when I work with Igor, my business partner, there's just all these little things that his dad, who's an amazing male figure, has shown him. And he's like, Danny, how do you not know how to do this? And I was like, I've never been exposed to it.
Just wasn't there.
It just wasn't there. So this is what we're talking about.
Yeah, this is it, right? And it does have an impact because I think in many ways, what it means to be a man, masculine traits, principles, tendencies, all of these things are generally modeled, and then they're things that we begin to embody based on the modeling that we've seen. So if you have a complete absence of what a man looks like, right? Say you grew up in a single mother household. That mom could be the best mom in the world, right? She really could be attentive and loving and caring, but she's not going to be able to model the challenges of what it means to be a man. She's not going to be able to model what it means to be a man who is dealing with struggle or his anger, right? And that's how a lot of young boys learn, is we learn through this modeling of what masculinity and being a man looks like. And when those things don't happen, there's a kind of vacancy that lives within so many men. And that vacancy leads to all types of things, right? 63% of youth suicides are from fatherless homes, right? 71% of teen pregnancies are from fatherless homes. 90% of homeless kids and runaway children are from fatherless homes. So you can just kind of go down the list and you can see that when a dad isn't present, specifically in a young boy's life, yes, in a child's life, but in a young boy's life, he is going to really, really struggle. And that's largely because we not only need that modeling and a kind of pathway that we can work towards to say, this is the direction. And it doesn't mean that your dad has to be perfect. Most kids don't grow up with a perfect dad. It's just that you're seeing, here's how I want to be, here's how I don't want to be. and I have something to press against. I have something to push against. And again, the literature and the research is pretty clear that fathers play a vital role, especially with young boys, in being able to temper aggression, being able to understand how to deal with our anger. So there's the things that you're talking about, which are very important, like how do you change the oil in your car and shave your face and do all these things, which my grandfather taught me how to do a lot of those things. And it's not that my dad wasn't around. It's just that I didn't see him very often, because of divorce laws. I saw him like once or twice a month for 2 or 3 days. And, 4 days out of the month for a young boy who's trying to figure out what it means to develop into manhood and develop skills and traits and characteristics of being a young boy and young man, it's not enough.
In the question that I still to this day have, and had a large one when I was in my 20s, was who am I? Who am I? Who is Danny Kerr? And I think, the thing that I filled that with, and I think a lot of people listening today too filled that with, was my business. I am Danny Kerr, the businessman. I am the entrepreneur. And I filled a massive amount of that lack or misunderstanding with the people and the processes and the customers and the interactions I had there. And that started to become me. Do you see this with entrepreneurs? I just specific on the angle of entrepreneurs, but how does this work relate to those who are running their own business? Is this a big thing? Like I imagine it is for me anyways. It's like, I define myself by my business now, which is not healthy. It's not something I want.
Yeah, there's two pieces I want to talk about. One is the lack of identity and lack of knowing who you are that can come along with not having a father figure in your life. And then the second piece is a lot of, how do I want to say this? Because kids are little bundles of egos, like psychologically, a child is just a little bundle of ego. And they personalize pretty much anything. So anything that happens in a child's environment, it's very probable that that child in some way, shape, or form is going to feel like they were the cause of that happening, right? Mom and dad are fighting. What did I do to cause this? Dad left. What did I do to cause this? Dad keeps hitting me and yelling at me. What did I do to cause this? And so when these things happen, when dad isn't present, when dad vacates or, dad isn't there, or dad's only there once in a while, or he's kind of deadbeat, or he's spineless, a child will take that on to say, what did I do that caused this? So there's two things that happen. One, lack of identity. And I see a lot of men being very driven to become successful, to fill the void of who they are, right? To fill the void of, I know who I am, and having a sense of identity and having a sense of meaning, and having a sense of depth within who they are. And the second big thing is that when this happens, and this is maybe even more prominent than the first, when you experience an upbringing where your father is abusive, or he's abandoned, or he's neglectful, one of the main things that I see happening is the development of what I've coined shame-based motivation, right? Dark motivation. And so what ends up happening is, for a lot of men, they use this shame and this pain. Something's wrong with me, right? Dad wasn't around. Something's wrong with me. Dad was always angry at me. Something's wrong with me. Dad just would never express himself. Something's wrong with me. And they'll take that shame and that pain, and they'll try and use it as fuel for motivation to go and build, to go and create, to go and accomplish, to go and achieve. And for a period of time, what often happens is it works really freaking well. It
worked really well. Yeah.
It works.
And it's addictive.
Really well, And then what inevitably ends up happening, and this is where so many men come to work with me, is it stops working. Mm-hmm. And they hit a wall. And they have achieved a whole bunch of things. They've accomplished awards. They've built the business. They've made tens of millions. They've whatever it is, right? They've become the New York Times bestseller, the famous rapper, or, the NFL or NHL athlete of the year, whatever. And then the shame-based dark motivation runs out, and it doesn't work anymore. And it starts to have a net negative impact, because that man has been driving himself with shame and aggression and anger and punishment, self-punishment, to try and achieve a goal, but he never lets himself actually experience the joy and the reward and self-acknowledge everything that he's done and accomplished, because his whole being has been to try and disprove some story. and that just runs out. And usually it runs out with a rock bottom, or hitting a wall, or selling a business and lacking purpose, or some type of addictive behavior. But that's usually the sign that it runs out.
When your entire contracting business is full of fires, which one do you put out first? This quiz will give you the answer, plus a step-by-step guide to actually get it done. Just take 5 minutes to answer some questions about your business, your leadership style, and your habits. Then you're going to get instant access to a personalized guide with recommendations based on our analysis of over 1,900 rapid growth contractors. You're going to learn which of the 4 phases of contractor growth you're actually in. Is it operator, manager, leader, or strategist? How your business stacks up in 6 core areas compared to industry benchmarks. And what to actually go do next, including customized resources, tools, and templates you'll have access to right away. No waiting around for some email or filling out a million separate forms. If you've got big goals, but no real plan to actually get there, take 5 minutes to fill this quiz out. It'll be the quickest and highest impact thing that you'll do for your business all day. I promise. Yeah, I have felt this in my own life, and I've seen a lot of us as entrepreneurs feel this, and it's this go, 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 go. And actually this year particularly has been a hard year for the industry. I know with interest rates going up and like the businesses have changed, not for everyone, but for a lot of us. And you start to realize that dopamine hit that I'm getting from achieving goals and growth and all the things, it's not there anymore. Wait a minute. What the hell is that actually drives me? And when you lose your drive, you lose your mojo, you lose your creativity, and it starts to creep in. So, when I was looking through what you do, you had mentioned something pretty prominently, which is like the shadow work. Can you explain what this is and how or why we should even be aware of this and work through this? Because I feel like what you're talking about is we've basically got all these like things, skeletons in our closet that we've ignored and we've been able to ignore. And now they're coming out and we need to confront them. So walk me through this. What is shadow work and why is it so important?
Yeah, well, the shadow is a Jungian concept, right? So Carl Jung created this notion of the shadow, and basically the shadow is the parts of yourself that you don't like, that you don't want to admit exist, that you don't want other people to know about, that you would rather kill off. That's usually an approach that a lot of men take. So these can be character traits, these can be ways of being, these can be beliefs, but generally the shadow is in your unconscious. So I'll go more into what that is and what forms it. The reason why it's so important is it relates directly to why and how you sabotage. So Jung said famously, unless you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. Unless you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. So unless we take these unknown variables about ourselves, the inner critic, the way that you talk to yourself, because nobody can hear you talk to yourself, the way that you sort of beat yourself up and punish yourself, and the sort of like self-loathing that you have, unless you start to bring these things up into consciousness and deal with them, they're going to direct your life. And the shadow has a way of, and this is again Jung, this part of you that you don't like, that you don't want other people to know about. For a lot of men, it's their weaknesses, it's their vulnerabilities. For some men, it's their anger. They'll have whole cart just disconnected from their anger or disconnected from compassion. They'll put those things into the shadow, and then it will come out in your marriage. It'll come out in your relationship. It'll come out, when you start to have success. So I'll give you a very brief example, because I see this a lot with nice guys and generally guys that have dysfunctional relationships with their fathers. The classic nice guy is disconnected from his anger. He's a people pleaser. He wants to make everybody happy. He wants to make sure that everyone around him is constantly happy with him, because that's how he gets his validation. He's outsourced his validation. And so anything that gets in the way of that is going to be a threat. His anger is seen as a threat. And most nice guys either grew up with a father who was pretty spineless and just never had any type of anger and never expressed any type of anger, or a father who was abusive and aggressive, and really sort of dominating and controlling. And he marked that as anger is bad. I don't want to be an angry man. And maybe he even had a mom that really reinforce that, right? Don't be like your father. Don't be an angry man. Angry men are dangerous. And so this man has kind of disconnected from his anger. Well, where did it go? It's not that your anger as a man has disappeared. That's impossible. It's simply that it has been moved out of your conscious awareness and into your unconscious experience. So it still comes out. And for a lot of these nice guys, they become passive aggressive. They make the snide remarks and the snide comments. They can be belittling and sort of character attack. And they can also become hyper resentful. And it'll come out in all of these sometimes small ways and sometimes more sort of direct ways. And so the reason why it's so important for you to deal with is that if you do not confront your shadow, it will continue to control large parts of your life. It'll start to ruin connection, intimacy, relationships. It can sabotage your finances. It can sabotage your business. And it usually shows up when things are going very well and things are moving in the right direction. And intimacy and closeness is being, built in the relationship. Those are usually the moments when it shows up. Jung said that the shadow aims to thwart your most well-meaning intentions and goals, right? And so it's in those moments, and how I've written about this is that your pain has its own intelligence, right? Your pain has its own intelligence. So if you don't learn how to deal with the pain that exists inside of you, then it will, and you try and neglect it and pretend it's not there and like you're not hurting, it's going to interrupt your life to try and have a seat at the table of your consciousness, of your daily existence. So maybe I'll pause there.
Yeah, I just want to talk about, this is great. And then just so you know, Connor, like you're speaking to me, you're describing me, which is great. This idea of self-sabotage has come up with a lot of the entrepreneurs we work with myself. And if I'm just personalizing it a little bit, I'm looking at this and I'm saying, why the hell do I self-sabotage? And it's partially, I say purposefully, I'm like, I think it's because I'm bored. But you know what the deeper purpose is, or the reason I'm noticing? I don't think I deserve it. Do you see, like, I don't know, how do we identify when we're like self-sabotage is coming up, and what are some of the things that are going on subconsciously and consciously that are causing this for ourselves? Because when I really look at it, I'm like, I tell everyone else, I'm bored as an entrepreneur, I just want to push and try. But I look at what you're talking about and I'm like, it's also because I don't think I deserve it. I'm kind of like, this is beyond me.
Yeah, I mean, self-sabotage is when you are doing anything that works against your self-interest. Right? Anything that works against your self-interest. So if you have an interest of having a good marriage and healthy communication and great sex and intimacy, but you are continually making choices and decisions that's working against those things, that's self-sabotage. The biggest misconception, and I think this is so important, I try and say this as often as I can, because I think in our society, sabotage is brutally misunderstood. The majority of people look at sabotage as a way to escape the sort of banal, right? It's like the way to get out of control. That's usually the way that people look at it. Oh, I sabotaged. Why? So I could just be out of control. Incorrect. Sabotage is a way to move back into control. It is a way to move back to what is familiar. And I've worked with hundreds and thousands of men now over the last 10, 12 years. And what I can tell you is that every single man that sabotages can map out the entire sabotage cycle every single time. He knows exactly, this is how I feel when I text that chick that I know I shouldn't text. And then this is how I feel when we meet up. And then this is how I feel after we've had sex. And then this is how I feel the next day. And then this is the promise that I make to myself that I'm never going to do it again. And then, the whole cycle begins again. So our brain, your brain, is a pattern recognition machine, and its core drive is to keep you alive and safe. And so your brain will naturally move you towards patterns, beliefs, and behaviors that it knows, and try and keep you away from patterns, beliefs, and behaviors that you do not know. Right. Now, here's the screwed up thing. It'll choose the dysfunctional, unhealthy behaviors that it knows over the functional, healthy behaviors that it doesn't. That's the screwed up thing about our neurology and how we're designed. And so sabotage is this way of moving back to familiar. Every single time you open the porn browser after you've said, I'm not going to do that, or you pour yourself the Jack Daniels, when you've said, I'm not going to do that this week. It's just moving you back towards familiar terrain and territory. And you have to begin to confront the pain, the beliefs, and the narratives that underride and that sort of write the programming and the code for that familiar territory. So it's always trying to pull you back into that pain that was created in the first place, right? And whatever that pain might be.
Familiar discomfort. It's just like, I know discomfort well. Let's get back there, because that's the pattern that I've had since I was a kid. And the unfamiliar comfort is something new, and it scares us. I've certainly felt that. Well said. So there's the burning question in all this. How do we fix this? Just give me a pill. What do we do here? You have some steps, so we'll walk through them. But like, what is the process that somebody goes to doing this and working through this properly?
Yeah, well, Jung talked about the first step in any therapeutic, any psychological, and any spiritual process being the step of confession. And this notion that in order to create change, the very first thing that you must do is understand the problem to its fullest and be able to admit that there's a problem. And this is why when you look at Alcoholics Anonymous, which Jung actually influenced, there's a very interesting story there. He actually influenced the creation of AA through one of his patients inadvertently. The first step in AA is, do you have a problem, right? Can you admit that you have a problem? And so that's really the first step. So the first step, whether you want to call it confession, whether you want to call it radical honesty, whether you want to call it transparency, it is about a kind of ruthless ownership over the bull that you have been allowing to take place in your life. And that bull might be that, for years, you have verbally abused yourself internally. And this is the case for a lot of men that I've worked with, is that when they come to work with me, what they say is, oh, there's these problems in my marriage. There's these problems in my business. I've reached this ceiling and I can't seem to crack through. And when I get into it, one of the main things that they're dealing with is that the way that they speak to themselves is brutal. It's terrible. They would never let anybody else in their life talk to themselves that way. So the very first step is beginning to define and refine and confess what the actual problem is, whether that's, porn usage or infidelity or lies or, a limiting belief that you've been dealing with for a long time that you're ashamed of or you're embarrassed about. It's actually just working with somebody, whether that's an individual or a group, to be able to say, here's what's been going on. Here's the absolute truth of what I've been hiding. Because for almost every single man, that's how we deal with it. We have been taught that suppression equals strength. Suppression, pushing it down, hiding it, ignoring it. And so what most men do, and what gets most men into trouble with sabotage, is that they don't talk about it. They hide it. They don't address it or deal with it. And so nobody really knows that man is struggling. And this is why when you see men, who are dealing with depression or have suicidal ideation and, things really bad happen, a lot of the times people around them will say, I had no idea. I just had no idea. So that confession really is the first step. So maybe I'll pause there because I think that might be something up.
It makes me think about just in my faith. Like my first point of confession is with God, and I sit down and I pray. And it's the things that I pray about that are probably the biggest things that I need to work on. And it's between me and God. And I can't even imagine not being able to let that out every once in a while. Because it just like you said, it bottles up and it stays to a point where you just think, oh, this is just me. This is just how life is. And to hold all that on my shoulders is a lot. And I think for a lot of us, especially as entrepreneurs, like we don't have a lot of external sources that we can go to. We're kind of the captains of our own ship. We're often the leaders of our families. We're the people that need to kind of, like you said, stay strong and bottle it up. My version of what you just talked about is prayer and admitting where I've up, basically. So thank you for saying that. For those listening, is there any other just ways to identify this? How do we identify some of these things that are just causing us pain? Is there anything else you could speak to this on?
Well, I did want to just speak to what you were saying, which is that a lot of the times what is helpful is actually having other people that, yes, you can bring it to God. And I think that is incredibly important and it's valuable. I also think there's a reason why the church, for pretty much, as you know, throughout all of existence that we know of, had priests that you could go and confess to. And I think that, you know, that being able to share what's actually happening, the burden of your life and your business and the relationship with another human being is very important. And I think that's very important, especially when we're dealing with something that's so human and that we feel is so flawed that sometimes I know a lot of individuals, it's like there's a different quality admitting it to another person versus admitting it to God.
Yeah.
You know, and because I think for a lot of people, God, it's like there's a reverence and there's a letting go that normally happens, versus with another person, we have to face the perceived judgment and the embarrassment and the liability of it. And so, you know, I have a group of 6 men that I meet with, and they're all entrepreneurs, and some of them are wildly successful, and, you know, some of them are on the same level as myself. And, you know, there's no secrets there, you know, and it is insanely beneficial. And I think that it's something that every single man should have, especially the men that are listening to this, that have businesses and employees and families that all rely on you. Yes, talk to God, and yes, talk to other men. So I just wanted to bring that in. In terms of how to identify it, there's sort of the practical and then the sort of existential or ethereal, sure. Right? The practical is look at your life and really sit down with pen and paper and ask yourself, what feels like it's missing in my life? Where do I not like myself? What decisions and choices am I making that cause me to lose respect and trust in myself? And that will give you a very tactical look at where you are likely out of alignment, where you're probably acting from the shadow. You could also explore things like, and these are just questions that I ask people all the time, what do I not want other people to know about me? That's probably a good indicator of something that's in your shadow. What don't I allow myself to feel or express in front of other people? You know, what about my past do I not want people to know about? What do I think I need to hide from other people? So these are all prompts that you can use that will put you into direct contact with that sort of psychological material of the shadow and give you a real tactical piece. The other piece, the sort of existential or ethereal piece, is in your gut. In your gut. They're in your gut. In your intuition, there's a part of you that knows where you're out of alignment and where you are driving the ship of your life like the Titanic into an iceberg. And it knows. And a lot of men have disconnected themselves from that deeper quality of knowing, that deeper connection to their gut, to their, whether you want to call it higher intelligence, lower intelligence, whatever. But they've disconnected from this deeper sense of, I know where I'm out of alignment, where I'm acting out of integrity or against my values or against my morals. And so sometimes it's a matter of sitting in silence, going out into nature and letting that question ring around. Where do I already know that I'm out of alignment? And coming back to a kind of centered quality of truth within yourself as a man.
Yeah, I think those questions are very bang on, actually. And I think as far as your gut, that makes a ton of sense. And I think what happens quickly is once you've identified those things, if you don't do anything with it, you justify it at some level. Do you see this in people?
Yeah.
Yeah. So we've identified it, which is great, but it won't fix the problem. So what do we do next? How do we take that identification and not justify it? How do we work through it now properly? I think the next thing you have is explore, but speak to that a little bit, maybe. Give us some thoughts on this.
Yeah, well, the next step is that you start to explore the origins of where that came from. And that is sometimes going to be pretty clear and pretty concise. You might start to look at, why have I suppressed my anger? How come I never let myself be angry? Or, maybe it's the antithesis of that, the opposite of that. Maybe it's that you're angry all the time and you lose your temper constantly and, you're sharp and harsh with people. and really beginning to ask yourself and explore, what are the origins of this behavior? What are the origins of this belief, right? If you're somebody that, sort of constantly is demeaning themselves and tearing themselves down, and you're perfectionistic, everything has to be perfect. Otherwise you beat the living shit out of yourself internally. And, any small failure, ball that's dropped, it becomes the reason why you just get to tear yourself a new one. Where did that come from, right? Really starting to explore the origins of where it came from, right? Because it has an origin. And two, what do you get out of that? How do you think that you're benefiting from that behavior? And then thirdly, what is it protecting you from? What is it protecting you from? A lot of these behaviors, inner critical dialogue, right? Talking to yourself really harshly, being judgmental, being perfectionistic, sort of being a perfectionist. All of these behaviors were at one point a maladaptive protection strategy. What do I mean by that? I mean that at some point in your life, you had to deploy this self-criticism to protect you from something, or to try and get you something. You had to deploy that behavior to either make sure you didn't get punished in the household. You had to deploy that belief because it was reinforced externally, right? Maybe you heard certain words. What the hell's wrong with you? How come you can never get this right? 97%, where's the other 3%, right? Those are things that people hear all the time. And so you deployed these behaviors and these strategies as a means of protecting yourself, right? A means of keeping you safe. So the last piece is how have these behaviors, or how are these behaviors attempting to keep you safe? How are they trying to protect you? And that can be challenging sometimes, because we can start to look at these and say, well, how the hell is my anger protecting me? But when in actuality, it's protecting you from having to feel sad or any type of grief, or ever be vulnerable or feel weak. And it allows you to, continue to be in this place of superiority or dominance. So we have to be willing to get into these sort of harder pieces of why that's happening.
I've talked about this in other podcasts. I spent 2 years with a coach who was supposed to be more of an executive coach, but really what it came down to was all the stuff we're talking about right now. And after 2 years of working with him, the one thing that came out of it was, Danny, you need to learn how to feel safe. You'd actually mentioned this earlier in our talk, where you're like, you build all the safety around you. You have the picture perfect life, but you still don't feel safe. And you have to learn to enjoy what you have around you. So that was his feedback after 2 years of working with me. I'm curious, is that what it is for all of us? Is it ultimately we're just trying to feel safe, and that's what's fueling all of this dysfunction? Or is it different for different people?
It's a little different for different people.
Okay.
So if you look at something like developmental psychology, and this is, a lot of psychology are theories, but there are some of them that, like developmental psychology, that has been much more rigorously tested. So when you look at developmental psychology, there's different developmental stages that we go through. And depending on your upbringing, if you go through a developmental stage and you have some type of, we call it interruptions, right? Some type of interruption in that stage, that's what you'll revert to when things start to go south, right? So when the relationship's in question, or, you feel embarrassed by your wife, or embarrassed by a colleague or an employee or something like that, you'll revert to this developmental stage because you feel threatened. So the first two stages are the really big ones. And there's sort of the one when you're in utero, when it's sort of like life is just beginning. But the main one is from 0 to 18 months. When after you're born, you go through a stage of discovering whether or not the world is okay. Is my world safe? And because when you're 0 to 18 months, your nervous system, your neurology is connected with your primary caregiver. So what mom experiences, you experience. What mom goes through, you go through. And the research on this with polyvagal theory and other different forms of research is pretty damn strong. Like when so for example, if you're 12 months old, or you're an infant, and mom is having severe postpartum depression, and she's not caring for you, she's sort of neglectful, she's chronically sad, that is going to unfortunately shape some of your nervous system. It's going to shape some of your neurology. And so when you get later on in life, this will live in you unconsciously. And it'll come out in all these ways of not trusting surrounding environment. Is my world okay? Can I trust other people? Does life have it out for me? These are the types of things that you hear. And so here there's a rupture in being able to trust life and the world and feel safe with life and the world. And then we go into the next developmental stage, which is actually where I see a lot of men struggling. And the next developmental stage is 18 months to 3 years. And this is where you start to, as a kid, differentiate between mom and you, primary caretaker, the world, and yourself. And you start to develop a sense of self, right? This train is mine. This dinosaur is mine, right? This is my hair. And your sense of self starts to form. This is also where most kids hear no, like 4,000 times a week, you know?
I remember that.
Like they're just,
I remember it.
Yeah.
Mom, can we get the chocolate bar? No, we can't afford it. So I would smell the chocolate bar and I would put it back.
Exactly. And so in this stage, what we're starting to develop is, am I okay? Am I all right? And what can get interrupted here is, you know, if you're constantly being told, like, say you have a parent that's just like, what's wrong with you? Like, how come you can't do this? That's going to interrupt the development of, I'm okay, right? There's nothing wrong with me. I'm all right. And what will end up happening is that later on in life, you'll just keep reverting back to this. There's something wrong with me. There's something wrong with me. There's something wrong with me, until we begin to get down to rewiring our nervous system to be able to feel safe, as you're saying, right? So for you, it really sounds like those first 18 months, something was going on, right? It's like, am I safe in the world? Not, am I okay? Just, am I safe in the world? Is it safe for me to trust? And that is a big thing for some men. And for other men, the really dominant one is, am I okay? Or is there something wrong with me? And that's for me, that was it. There was a real deep fundamental questioning of, is there something wrong with me? Am I okay?
That's awesome, Connor. I've never actually had anybody explain it in that concrete of a way, because usually these topics are so ethereal. But to say, hey, Danny, it's probably your early 18-month-old life, the safe thing is usually, and then after that, it's, am I personally okay? Because I'm like, I do actually feel pretty okay. I feel safe in myself, but I don't feel safe in the world outside of me. And I don't feel safe with all the different things going on. And I'm constantly preparing. You should see when COVID happened, the amount of freeze-dried food that I bought that's still in my garage because I am like, we need food, you know. Anyway, I did not buy toilet paper. I bought a bidet. I was just like, it's just like,
That's great.
Oh God. Anyway, yes, I hear you. So this is so good. I want to go back to our steps here, but it's identify first. And these questions you put out there are so good. And then we can start to explore the root of it. And you've just kind of even given us like two major areas where this root could really come from early in our life even. What's the next step? How do we move through this properly? I think confront and connect is what I wrote down, but let's talk through this.
Yeah, I mean, you have to confront the patterns that are happening. And I like to say that there's no change without confrontation. Change cannot occur without some type of confrontation. And that confrontation is usually the knowing that your brain and your nervous system and your psyche don't necessarily want to change, right? Like I said, they want to keep you in familiar territory, even if it's dysfunctional and not working for you. So part of the confrontation is knowing it is actually not going to be easy. Your brain and your body likely don't want to do it. And that's what you're up against, right? You're kind of working against the grain to form new behaviors, new choices, new belief systems, new patterns, new ways of interacting and connecting with yourself. So if you've done the first two steps, you will have likely identified something that was in your shadow, right? Anger, a lack of self-compassion, a lack of self-recognition, a lack of being able to express anger in a healthy way and set boundaries, right? Because boundaries actually require anger to set them and to know that people are crossing them. And then in this stage, you begin to move into the confrontation of doing the hard thing of self-recognizing, being able to self-recognize, being able to praise yourself and acknowledge yourself for doing something challenging or hard, right? The thing that you normally wouldn't do, right? If you're somebody that's a perfectionist, right? You normally just will not allow yourself to be like, actually, that was phenomenal. I really did a good job there. For a lot of people, they're just not going to even bother engaging in that. So you have to start to deploy the tactics and the strategies to work against the shadow, right? To work against that core behavior of, I'm not allowed to recognize myself. I'm not allowed to acknowledge my value or my efforts. I'm not allowed to be angry. I'm not allowed to be compassionate towards myself. And you start to practice these things. For some guys, it's going to be just practicing being honest, and not lying. Because for some guys, in order to avoid punishment and neglect or abandonment growing up, they just deployed a lot of lying. And so, you might actually just be working to catch yourself in the lie. I call it autocorrect, catch yourself in the lie and correct it with the truth. That might be the practice. So it's confronting what's happening and beginning to replace the behavior with something that is healthy, more generative, and actually going to be in service of you instead of working against you.
It's very action based. It's not just speaking, I am safe, I am beautiful, it's actions. And in those actions, you said there's a reinforcement that you need to verbally also give yourself. Could you give some examples of this even in your own life? And maybe I'll give some of mine too as we work through this, but like, what are some specific things that you've even done in this?
Yeah, I mean, some of those are very relevant for me. I did not have an ounce of self-compassion. I really was the guy who, I grew up with sometimes pretty verbally and sometimes physically abusive stepfather. And that carried through into how I treated myself, so I became a man who treated himself with that same level of verbal hostility. And I was never compassionate towards myself. I never let myself off the hook. And it was brutal, what the fuck's wrong with you? Such a piece of shit. How come you could why can you do this? And da, da, da. And it was very much the voice of the man that largely raised me that had permeated into my daily life. So I really had to deploy a practice of autocorrecting every single time I would hear that voice. Every single time I started to talk to myself like that, I'd have to stop. I'd have to interrupt the pattern. I'd have to set a boundary. No, enough. I'm not speaking to myself like that. And then I'd have to replace it with some type of commentary that actually was functional or healthy, and good, So it's like, okay, I made a mistake. I'm fallible, I'm human, and I still made the effort, and I'm going to congratulate and recognize myself for the effort. And then the last thing that I deployed was a little bit more of like a robust gratitude practice. Usually people are like, I'm grateful for my kids and I'm grateful for, my business. But we need to anchor those things in. And so for me, it was, what I appreciate about myself today is why that's important is and how it makes me feel is. So we need to anchor it in intellectually. We need to know that it actually matters at a rational, logical level. And then we need to be able to anchor it in from an emotional sense of how do I actually feel about that? Because gratitude, just saying I'm grateful for these things, it becomes white noise. It feels like bull, for a lot of people.
If it has no action, I've always tried it and I'm like, this feels like I'm just doing it because the guy told me to do it. I'm like, I'm out. Like, I feel like I'm bullshitting myself. But in action, there is truth. There's like, hey, I did that today. Good for me.
Right.
Connor, in this, like, again, I'm speaking about myself, but like, I struggle to sit in good moments. I'm constantly looking for the next moment. And when moments are good, I don't feel I maybe deserve it, or I wonder what could be next. And so I'm constantly jumping over to the next thing. And in what you're speaking to, the version of this is like, hey, I'll sit in it and I'll enjoy it for that day and I'll be super proud of it. But dude, it still fades within like 3 to 6 months. Like, I just keep going back to my old way of being. How do we anchor this to be a part of who we are till we're old men? Like, because I just feel like it's like, and is it just a constant battle, or does there come a day where you start to just be that way?
If you put enough effort into it and you begin to, I'm going to use a very specific word that I think some people are not going to like, but you begin to surrender into it, and you surrender to allowing yourself to receive that goodness, that appreciation, then it can become a practice that becomes more automatic and less muscled, and there's the 4 stages that we go through, right? There's unconscious incompetence, which means that we don't even know that we suck at it. There's conscious incompetence, so we know that we suck at it. There's conscious competence, so we know that we're getting better at it. And then there's unconscious competence. And so we know we don't even have to think about it. We're just good at it, right? So like we all go through this phase when we start to drive a car, right? Like when you're 7, you don't even know that you suck at driving a car because you're not even thinking about it. And by the time that you're the age that we are, you just get in your car and you drive and you're just unconsciously good at it. This is the same thing with what you're talking about, is that we have to exert enough practice and enough trial and error to allow ourselves to get to a place where we can say, actually, I am getting very good at receiving goodness. I'm getting very good at receiving praise and validation from others and from myself. And eventually it does move into a space of unconscious competence where we actually just do allow ourselves to feel that. My question for you is, what do you actually get out of not allowing that for yourself? What do you get out of it?
You said it earlier. It's like this feeling of safety to the things that I am comfortable with for my entire life. I'm too uncomfortable for too long. Sitting with my kids and watching a movie is great, but I start to feel after a while like I'm uncomfortable. I'm like, I just need to like move around and like maybe I'll get some popcorn and I'll go, and I just can't be in the moment. And I call it ADD or whatever, but like I can tell there's something, call it broken, whatever it is. We talked about shadow work. Like it's something in my childhood that's like, Danny, you don't know how to rest, and it's ingrained in you. And I force it, and there's times where I really enjoy it, but it doesn't seem to stick. And it's been years of working on. There's a lot of things that I need to work on, but presence is a big one, and it comes from all the stuff we're talking about right now. The only thing that I've noticed that's helped beyond just me doing it, muscling it, like you said, myself, is being around good people who have that ingrained in them, and being able to be around those types of families and going on vacation with those types of families and just seeing and acting with them so it functions more normal. Because I also feel like the friend group I grew up with, we've all got very similar demons. We've all got similar stuff. But when I'm starting to change my influence group, some of those people are very different, and they're reinforcing a little bit more of that. Like the best vacation I've been on this summer was with a very different family, and we were present with the kids because that's how they do it, and I got to see what functional versions of that actually looks like.
Yeah. Okay. I'm going to say a couple of things. I think I've worked with enough men now that are high performers and very successful in pretty much every industry you could possibly name, to know that there's a psychological threat that what most men will say is, if I start to actually slow down and learn to rest, then I won't be able to perform in the way that I need to in order to be successful. So usually the threat is to the way of being that has allowed you to actually produce success in your life. And for a lot of guys, that's a very stressed, tight, frantic, tightly wound way of existing that, it is usually rooted in our childhood, right? And it's like, it is kind of a strange thing. What was the comedian? I was watching a comedian, maybe it was Bill Burr, I can't remember. And he was like, it's such a funny thing that if you want to make a great man, let him be a boy with a father. And it's a very strange thing that for a lot of men that are very successful, there is a strain that has happened in their youth. There's some type of strain, but we can, you can move through that, and you can allow yourself to be deeply present and to rest and perform exceptionally well. This is a whole other conversation about the autonomic nervous system and how the majority of us men are from morning till night we are in sympathetic dominant state, which means that we are in a stress dominant state. We wake up, we open our emails, we're working immediately, or you're getting the kids ready for school, and then you're getting straight into work, and you're just in this sympathetic dominant stressed out state all day until the very end of the day, and you do not know how to get out of it. That's all that I really hear you saying, right? I don't know how to get out of this sympathetic dominant stress state and actually just rest.
Yep.
And that likely, based on what you said, really hit for the 0 to 18 months. That's likely, my guess would be, if we were to work together and get deep into that, and I'm not saying that we should, I'm just saying that if we were, that there was some interruption at 0 to 18 months that happened for you, where you, as a very young human, didn't know deep rest.
Right.
And didn't know being held in a safe way that allowed your nervous system to actually just find peace. And that's the case for a lot of men, right? I'll give you one more stat. By the age of 3, the majority of young boys will be touched, held, and kissed 50% less than young girls by the age of 3. So our bodies and our nervous systems, quite often, and depending on the school of thought that you were raised with, because, some kids were raised in the kids should be seen and not heard, and you don't, let them cry it out and all those types of things, they can be very stress inducing for an infant's nervous system. And that can cause us to not really know how to rest. So there are ways to work with that. There's a reason why we do big group work. Yeah, I mean, within my company, we do these big retreats with 20, 30, 40 men. And we do that because the group acts as a collective nervous system. And for a lot of men, the story that they've been carrying around is, my pain, my dysfunction, my is too much for anybody to handle. But in these settings, that story and that belief crumbles, because it's like, well, you've got 40 other dudes here, and it doesn't really matter how angry you're going to get. It doesn't matter how big you are and how talented you are at jiu-jitsu and how good of a Muay Thai fighter you are. There's 40 dudes here. Like, you're going to be all right. It doesn't matter how much sadness and grief you have to, squeeze out of your system, or if you just need to be held, in a way where you can remember that the world is okay, that the world is safe, that it's a safe thing to trust. Whatever it is, those group environments are useful because they act as this collective nervous system that helps a man's nervous system to achieve a quality of rest, of release that he hasn't been able to experience before. And from there, I call it a somatic screenshot. If you've experienced once, you can return to it. But for a lot of men, they actually haven't experienced the thing that they know they're missing. Yep. Right? They haven't experienced the rest that they know they're craving. They haven't experienced the being held or the release that they know they need. And so it's like, well, how do you get to a place that you've never been before without
This is what I'm saying. This is why I'm like, I do it manually and it kind of works, but I'm like, what is this? And like I said, the best version of this was the vacation we took with this other family, where I was like, oh, this is what it looks like. Oh, this is what it feels like. And I think it's repetition. I think it's repetition. And I actually think it's more often than once a year. I think it's like once a quarter. It's like, keep that moving forward, because I'm a stubborn bastard and I just keep doing me. Right. So yeah,
I got it.
I like, there's this burning question I'm having while we're talking the whole time, because you keep talking about childhood, and I know how old your kids are and I know how old my kids are. And I'm constantly questioning, how do we be good dads? All right. What can we take from this, even for those listening, where we can at some level, not just work on ourselves, but also make sure that we don't pass this to our kids and we do a good job raising our kids?
Yeah. Well, a good friend and mentor of mine said something that has always stuck with me, which I appreciate and gives us. So I'm going to start with this, which is, you're going to f your kids up.
Okay.
No matter what. Like, there is no such thing as perfect parenting.
Mm-hmm.
It just doesn't exist.
Yep.
And in fact, the more the more religiously and feverishly dedicated you are to being this perfect dad, the likelihood is that you're going to f them up even more because you're going to be blind to your own bullshit. Right? You're just going to blind yourself to it. So just know that it's not about you being infallible. You know, it actually is about you being imperfect and then being able to model what you as a man do with those imperfections. You know, that is the key. If I could teach any father one thing, it is model what you do as a man with your imperfections for your kids. Model that. I don't get it wrong. With all of my tools and all of my work, there are times where I still lose my temper, get it wrong with my son, but I model what that looks like. I'll sit him down. I have a whole system with him, right? If he's out of control and, you know, he's wilding out and throwing a tantrum, I'll let him throw a tantrum, and then I'll sit with him. I'll sit cross-legged straight across from him. I'll face him. I'll say, give me eyes. That's our sort of like code word. I'll say, give me eyes, and he'll look me in the eyes, and I'll hold his hands, and we'll have a conversation, you know. Or if I've, you know, lost my temper and I've raised my voice at him, same thing. I'll sit down, I'll take a moment, I'll go outside, I'll take a few breaths, and then I'll come back and I'll sit with him. I'll say, Kate, let's sit down. And he knows the drill, and we'll sit down. I'll hold his hands, I'll look in his eyes, and I'll say, Daddy's sorry for losing his temper and getting loud with you. That wasn't okay. Yeah. And he'll say, that's okay, Dad. You know, whatever he says, and then we'll hug and everything will be okay. So model what it looks like to be a man who deals with his imperfections. This is something that for a few generations, you haven't seen that. Yeah. You know, the majority of guys that are probably listening to this is like, they've never seen their father deal with their imperfections. So if you can do that, you're going to teach your kid how to adeptly and effectively deal with their own imperfections, because they're going to have their own imperfections. And that is one of the best things that you can do. That the last thing that I would say is prioritize presence with your children. They do not need much, especially if they're young. They do not need much outside of your presence. So for me in the mornings, from the time I wake up to the time I start work, there's no phone, there's no computer. I'm with my kids. And that's hard sometimes when I have a lot going on in my business, but that is a priority for me. You know, my son asks me to go play trains with him or dinosaurs. I'm in there, you know. I might only have 10 minutes to do so before I have to take him to preschool or whatever. But those 10 minutes, I'm like, you lead the way. What are we doing? You know, or I'll create a game for us, right? So give your kids the full blast of your presence as often as you humanly can. Sit with them, watch a movie with them, you know, create games with them, create habits, create rituals with them, but be present when you do it. I think so many parents are struggling with their own phone usage and phone addictions and technology addictions that are seeping into robbing them of time with their kids. And I think that's just the main thing. It's just be super present.
This summer, we saw it the worst, all of us, because summer break hits, all the kids are out of school and you're trying to keep them busy. And in between spaces, this is where the technology creeps in, and like I've never seen before. And me and my wife, like, school just started. So we're like, it is so good to get everybody back into a routine, because good Lord, we needed one. All of us did. It wasn't just on them. Like you said, it's us too leading the way. But yeah, what I'm taking from you on this is, like, be real with your kids. Be real with who you are and what you've done well and not well. And don't try and be a superhero. I know sometimes my kids are like, Dad, you're a superhero. I'm like, I'm human. Just so we're clear. And there's some things I know for sure. And there's some things I need to work on, and just to be real with them in the things where you might have done well or not well with them, and let them understand you're infallible, or you have infallibilities. And then you also go ahead.
One last thing, which is, you know, again, a lot of the research shows that how you treat your wife is going to set your son up for a lot of different variables in life. It's going to be in a large part what he either how he aspires to be with women, or, you know, how he does not want to be with women. And for a lot of young boys, being able to see a father loving his mother in a healthy way and being able to resolve conflict. You know, like my wife and I, she's a marriage and family therapist. And so when we do have conflict, if we're in a disagreement, we're not afraid to do that in front of our kids sometimes when it's appropriate, and to resolve it, and to just resolve it as quickly as possible in front of our kids. But I'm very open and affectionate with my wife, and I love on her as often as humanly possible in front of my kids. And it's so funny because I'll end off with this. We have gotten in such a habit of it that my son sees it as an open invitation now to come and get love and affection. So when I start loving on my wife, hugging her or giving her a kiss or whatever in the kitchen or living room, and he sees it, he immediately will get out of his chair and come running over and get right in between us because he wants to be a part of that. And so I think it's like build and foster that culture of love and affection. And if you are giving that to your wife, if you're really committed to that with your partner, then your kids will want to be a part of that. They'll just feel that love is something that is natural within the household.
That's good. I have all girls actually. And I've noticed one thing, and this is advice, I don't know who gave this to me, but your girls will date and marry the man that they see in their father. And so the way that you treat your girls, the way you take them out on little dates, the way that you speak with them is the man that they will seek later. And I'm very conscious of like, am I the man that I want my daughter to meet? And am I showing up in that way? And I think I do okay. But I think I've got a lot of things to work on too. So
good stuff, man.
Connor, this was awesome. Thank you. Thank you for giving your time in this. And just going deep in this way. I think there's a lot of people listening that would appreciate this. I personally appreciate this conversation. It means a lot. If people want to reach out to you, if they want to find you, how do they do this? And then any final thoughts as well?
Yeah, I mean, the best way is mantalks.com or ManTalks on Instagram or YouTube. My show is up on YouTube there's video there. Also on Spotify, there's video there now. So that's great. So you can find me there. Reach out, if there's somebody that's watching this and something hit you, fire me off a message on Instagram. I try to respond to everybody. So don't hesitate to reach out if you have any follow-up questions or thoughts or comments, or maybe there's something that you didn't like, that's okay too. Feel free to reach out. I love talking to as many guys as I can, because I think men need a little bit more support, and in our modern culture, that's not necessarily something that exists in like a healthy way where it's promoting family values and strength and all the things that we've been talking about in this show. So don't hesitate to reach out.
Amazing. Thank you for doing the work you do, man. We all need it.
Thanks, brother.
Thanks so much for watching. If you thought today's episode was awesome, it probably means you should subscribe. You're going to get more Contract Revolution episodes in your feed, and I'll see you next week.
Paint Ed podcasts are produced by the Painting Contractors Association and are made possible by members and industry partners. To find out more about the upcoming educational opportunities or for more information about joining the PCA, visit pcapainted.org.